I just want to take a few minutes and talk to you about trauma, stress, and the brain. Trauma and stress has a very negative impact on the way that our brain functions. But the great thing of it is if we can learn to understand our brain, we can learn to better deal with stress and to better understand what's happening to us. So I'm going to draw a picture here of our brain, and I'm simplifying things a lot. But as I draw a brain, and you'll see I'm not an artist, but basically in our brain fits inside our head is kind of like this. And if this is our brain stem and this is the bottom part of our brain and our front part of our brain, if I take a cross section of this and I put it up on the whiteboard here and kind of magnify it, this is what it is going to look like. So as I mentioned at the bottom part here, this is our brain stem. And the brain stem is really what connects the brain and body and relays a lot of information from the brain to the body and vice versa. And at the base part of our brain is really what's referred to as the reptilian part of our brain. And with the reptilian part of the brain, this is our most basic part of our brain, and it's responsible for the basic things like breathing. It's also responsible for things like our sleep, our heart rate. This part of our brain is primarily responsible for things like digestion. It's all kind of the automatic functioning, our toileting. All of that is the stuff that we don't really have to think about. I don't have to think about, okay, I need to take a deep breath, or I don't have to think about my heart needs to beat right now. So really, this part of the brain is the oldest part of our brain, and it's the most basic part of the brain. And sometimes when we talk about this part of the brain, we talk about the fact that this part is responsible for our fight, flight, freeze, and sometimes you may have heard of our fawn response. So this part of our brain is the part of our brain that essentially is the one responsible for when we feel a threat or when we are overly stressed, that this part of the brain needs to be regulated and needs to learn how to calm down before we can move on to other areas of our brain. Our middle part of our brain, sometimes we talk about this as our sensory somatic part of our brain, or this is also called our limbic and is responsible for our limbic system. A lot of what happens in this part of the brain is the processing of emotions and memories, and this part of the brain is really important for dealing with stress, dealing with relationships, and really connecting the reptilian part of the brain with this higher level part of the brain, which is our executive functioning part of our brain, which can sometimes be thought of as like the air traffic control part of our brain. It's the frontal lobe is part of this. And our frontal lobe and this part of our brain is really the cause and effect part of our brain. It's the part of our brain that sequences things and that tends to pair logic with a lot of our experiences. So what's important to understand is in the way that our brain processes information is really bottom up and then back to front. And so what this essentially means is that everything gets processed through our reptilian part of our brain. And if this part of our brain is dysregulated or is struggling with a lot of stress, we're going to have problems with breathing, for example. This is where panic attacks can sometimes happen, or we're going to have sleep issues, or we're going to feel different parts of our body don't seem to be cooperating well. We might feel constipated, or we might have other things that just don't feel really connected with ourselves. And so First and foremost, when we're dealing with stress, when we've had a lot of trauma happen in any type of therapy or any type of even self-help work that you do, we have to learn how to calm down this part of the brain, that reptilian kind of lizard brain. And the best way to start thinking about how to do this is really through our senses, is that if we can learn to pay attention and ground ourselves and be present with ourselves and learn strategies that we cover in this Be Brave Bridge exercise, is really around regulating our breath, which is being mindful about our experience. If I can understand that, oh, my heart rate is beating very fast, I just want to take a nice deep belly breath, this part of my brain is going to begin to regulate. And when that happens, it allows us eventually to move up to a higher level functioning part of our brain, which allows us to access cause and effect, have logical thinking about things. If we don't calm this down, sometimes what people describe is they know that they need to do certain things, or they know that they just need to breathe, for example, but they just can't do it or don't have the skills or strategies to do that. So that's why, first and foremost, we want to really focus on regulating and calming this part of our brain, so that as we move through needing to make decisions or check in with ourselves, that we can really attach both our emotional part of our brain as well as our logical part of our brain. And if we do that, really what this looks like, if this is emotions and this is logic, really what we want, we don't just want to make decisions or respond from an emotional place, and we don't just want to respond from a purely logical place. Really what we want is that sweet spot right in the middle here. And this, in therapeutic terms, is called wise mind. So if we are coming from a place and operating from wise mind, we are usually doing pretty good.